What if the divine spark you've been chasing was never outside of you? Imagine that everything you were taught to seek in temples, books, or gods was actually buried within your own consciousness. They never told you that silence holds a code and your thoughts have weight, frequency, and power. And maybe, just maybe, that's why they kept you distracted. There's an ancient truth whispered in banned texts and hidden chambers, that you were designed to unlock something far greater than belief, raw, living awareness. But 99% of people will never access it because they've forgotten where to look. This isn't philosophy. It's physics of the soul, no fluff, just energy, consciousness, and truth. If you felt the pull, if something deep inside knows you're meant for more, this is your moment. To break the illusion, to stop waiting, to finally awaken the force that was always yours. This is not for everyone, but only if you're ready. What if the most sacred truth about your existence was never lost, just buried? Buried not in the sand, but beneath layers of fear, control, and silence. In 1945, a farmer in Egypt stumbled upon something that would shake the foundations of religious history. Hidden in a sealed clay jar near the cliffs of Nag Hammadi. Inside were ancient texts banned for centuries, scrolls that spoke not of a god in the sky, but of a God already alive within you. Among them was a forgotten gospel, one the church never wanted you to read. The Gospel of Thomas. Unlike the others, it wasn't about worship. It wasn't about sin. It was a mirror, a whisper, a message repeated through 114 sayings, one of which read, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. But if you do not bring it forth, that very power will destroy you." Why would a teaching like this be hidden? Because it shifts the center of gravity. It places divine authority not in temples or leaders, but in your own consciousness. Imagine a world where people no longer fear punishment from above, but seek awakening from within. That world would be uncontrollable. And that's precisely what made this gospel so dangerous. You were never told that early followers of Christ believed enlightenment was a direct experience, not given by priests, not bought through rituals, but remembered through silence and self-awareness. That's why these writings were erased from official scripture, labeled heretical, suppressed by decree, and nearly lost forever. Because they didn't teach submission. They taught sovereignty. Philosophers like Carl Jung called these texts the psychological keys to the soul. He believed they weren't just spiritual. They were deeply symbolic maps of inner transformation. Not about religion, but about human potential that has been systematically denied. So the question is, why have you never been invited to see yourself as sacred? Because awakening isn't profitable, and consciousness doesn't ask permission. It moves like fire, quiet, but unstoppable. And once you realize that what you're looking for is already within you, the entire architecture of fear collapses. But what these ancient scribes encoded between the lines is something no priest, no scholar, no emperor dared to speak aloud. Because hidden inside those fragmented pages is a secret not just about you, but about the origin of all reality. And it's precisely at that point that reality begins to unravel. You were taught to look up, to close your eyes, clasp your hands, and pray to something distant, high above, far away, separate. But what if that very act of looking outside is the reason so many never find what they seek? What if the search itself was designed to fail? Not because the divine doesn't exist, but because it was hidden in plain sight. From childhood, we're conditioned to associate God with something unreachable. But mystics, sages, and even scientists have been suggesting something far more radical. That the divine is not beyond the clouds, but buried in your own awareness. Carl Jung once wrote, "He who looks outside dreams. He who looks inside awakens." That's not just poetic, it's a redirection. A quiet rebellion against centuries of externalized worship. The idea is uncomfortable for many because it removes the safety of intermediaries. No more temples, no more robes, no more someone else to speak on your behalf. Just you and the silence inside your chest. That silence is not emptiness, it's a doorway, a living portal. And yet we drown it out with noise, distractions, and rituals we don't understand. Why? Because true self-inquiry is terrifying. It's not about belief. It's about remembering. Take the method used by the Indian sage Ramana Maharshi, who taught a single piercing question: who am I? Not as a concept, but as a practice. He claimed that if followed honestly, it would dissolve the illusion of separation, and with it, the false idea of a God outside you. Neuroscience now supports this inward focus. Studies on self-reflective awareness show that the brain lights up in completely different regions when we ask inward existential questions as opposed to external ones. Something literally shifts inside us. Modern thinkers like Nassim Haramein even propose that the geometry of the universe, the way galaxies spiral, the way atoms move, mirrors patterns found in our DNA. It's as if the intelligence that governs stars also lives in your cells. But we were never told to look there. Instead, we were handed stories, not to enlighten, but to distract, to keep our eyes on the heavens, while the real temple was always the body. And if that's true, if the spark of what we call God isn't out there, but folded into your being like fire in a seed, then every time you pray to something outside, you may be turning your back on the very force you're trying to find. There is no punishment in this mistake, only forgetting, a forgetting so deep it shaped civilizations. So the real question is, what happens when you stop chasing and start listening? What opens when the seeker realizes there is nothing to seek? The silence that follows isn't empty. It's full. It waits for those who are still enough to hear. But what comes next, no doctrine has ever fully captured. Because when the illusion finally cracks, and you turn inward without fear, something ancient begins to stir. But what it reveals is nothing like what you were taught to believe. You breathe every day without thinking. Your heart beats while you sleep. There's an intelligence in you that never needed permission to function. But what if that same intelligence wasn't just biological, but sacred? What if your body wasn't just a vessel, but a key, a hidden architecture, perfectly designed to awaken a force far greater than your conscious mind could ever grasp? For centuries, spiritual traditions spoke of energy centers, of inner power lying dormant, waiting. But now science is catching up. In studies conducted by Dr. Andrew Newberg, brain scans of monks and nuns in deep meditation revealed something stunning. Parts of the brain responsible for self-identification and separation quieted down, while regions tied to empathy, bliss, and interconnectedness lit up. This isn't metaphor. These are measurable shifts in consciousness triggered from within. And then there's your heart. The HeartMath Institute discovered that the heart generates an electromagnetic field up to 60 times stronger than the brain's. It responds before your brain even processes information, especially during emotional events. In other words, your heart knows before you think. Could this be why ancient cultures called the heart the seat of the soul? Not just the symbol of love, but of inner wisdom we've forgotten how to hear? Consider Wim Hof, a man once dismissed as a lunatic. He used breath and focus to control his immune system, resist cold, and enter altered states at will. His method has now been studied in peer-reviewed journals. The conclusion? The body can influence the mind. The breath can influence the nervous system. You can shift your own biology and by extension your consciousness. But who taught you this? Where in school were you told that your breath is a tool for a spiritual awakening? This knowledge isn't new. It's just been hidden, passed down in whispers in monasteries and tribes, stripped from mainstream education because it empowers the individual. And power that cannot be monetized or controlled is always inconvenient. So instead, we were trained to feel broken, to believe that only gurus or sacred texts could connect us to something higher. But if your body already contains the blueprint, then the quest becomes very different. It's no longer about adding anything. It's about removing the noise, tuning into the mechanisms already in place. Like tuning a forgotten instrument that once played the song of the universe and now waits to be heard again. And when that instrument finally starts to resonate, when breath and heartbeat fall into that silent rhythm, you don't just feel alive, you remember what you are. But it's in that remembering that everything begins to shift in ways no science has yet dared to define. From temples carved into mountains to scrolls locked behind monastery walls, the same message has echoed for thousands of years, but few ever recognized it. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't declared from pulpits. It was hidden in symbols, wrapped in metaphors, spoken only in silence. The message? You are not just flesh. You are not just thought. You are a fragment of something vast and divine. In the ancient Hindu text known as the Upanishads, there's a line whispered through generations. Atman is Brahman. The soul within you is not a part of God. It is God. This was never meant to be poetry. It was a declaration of identity. In Kabbalah, the tree of life maps not a universe outside, but one within, made of spheres representing divine aspects living inside the human psyche. These teachings didn't point to heaven. They pointed to you. In mystical Christianity, before doctrine-drowned experience, the early Gnostics taught that Christ wasn't just a man to worship, but a force to awaken inside. Elaine Pagels, in her research at Princeton, uncovered gospels where Jesus says, "Split a piece of wood, I am there. Lift the stone and you will find me, not in the clouds, not in cathedrals, but in matter, in consciousness, in you." Rumi, the Sufi poet, wrote, "You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop." What do these voices across time and geography have in common? They never begged you to believe. They invited you to remember. Because deep down, there's a recognition, a pull, a knowing that you were never meant to be small, that your suffering isn't proof of weakness, but of forgetting who you are. Even philosophers like Plotinus in ancient Greece spoke of the One, a source of all being from which each soul comes, and to which it can return not through obedience, but through inner alignment. And yet, modern life teaches the opposite, that you are incomplete, that transcendence is earned, or worse, bought. But the original teachings, before edits, before politics, whispered something else. You are the divine, dreaming of itself. So why has this knowledge been erased, distorted, domesticated? Maybe because a society full of people who know they are fragments of God cannot be controlled. They cannot be made to hate themselves. They cannot be sold salvation because they already know they were never separate from it. And when that realization finally lands, not in the mind, but in the marrow, something ancient begins to move through you. Not faith, not belief, but memory. But it's what happens when that memory becomes unshakable, that everything they taught you about being human begins to fall apart. There's a place inside you that you've been taught to avoid. A dark forest, silent and vast, where thoughts aren't clear and logic fades. They called it the unconscious. And for generations, it's been labeled as dangerous, something to suppress, medicate, or ignore. But what if this place you were told to fear is actually the gateway to the part of you that remembers you are divine? Sigmund Freud saw the unconscious as a buried cellar of impulses and trauma, but his successor, Carl Jung, saw something different. He called it the womb of the soul, a reservoir of symbols, dreams, and forgotten truths. He wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But to do that, you must descend, not upward into the heavens, but inward into what most people spend their lives running from." Within the unconscious, Jung discovered what he called archetypes, primordial patterns that shape every myth, story, and behavior. Not outside you, but inside. He believed that the self, the deepest part of your being, was not your ego, not your thoughts, but a divine spark hidden beneath layers of shadow. And the only way to access it was to face what you've denied. Modern psychology is catching up. Studies in depth psychotherapy show that when people engage with their dreams and subconscious symbols, healing accelerates. In therapeutic settings where patients practice active imagination, a technique Jung developed, individuals often report visions, insights, even contact with what they describe as a wiser, more ancient version of themselves. These aren't hallucinations. They are encounters with something that science still struggles to define. Online, thousands are rediscovering this through personal practice. Reddit threads dedicated to lucid dreaming and shadow work are filled with stories of ordinary people confronting inner fears and emerging with clarity, purpose, even spiritual awakening. One consistent pattern appears when people stop trying to control their mind and start listening to it something shifts. The unconscious stops being a threat and becomes a teacher. But this teacher doesn't speak in words. It speaks in symbols, images, synchronicities. It whispers through recurring dreams, emotional triggers, and irrational fears. And most will never hear it, not because it's quiet, but because they're too busy running from their own depth. But those who stop, those who enter the dark forest, often find something waiting for them. And when they do, it's not a monster. It's not madness. It's a presence, familiar, powerful, eternal. The face behind every mask you've ever worn. But what happens when you meet that presence? And it knows your name before you can even speak it? They speak of it like a myth. A serpent sleeping at the base of your spine, coiled and waiting. In yoga classes and spiritual circles, you'll hear the word Kundalini, sometimes whispered with reverence, other times with fear. But what most won't tell you is that this isn't just energy. It's initiation. And once awakened, nothing in your life remains untouched. In ancient Indian philosophy, Kundalini is not a metaphor, it's a force. A living current that rises through the body, piercing the chakras, burning away illusions. But this isn't a peaceful ascent. It's fire. It dismantles everything false. Swami Sivananda wrote that awakening the Kundalini is like playing with lightning. It can elevate or devastate. And this is why most modern teachings water it down, because the real process is far too raw. Online, forums like Quora and Reddit hold stories that many won't dare to say out loud. Accounts of spontaneous awakenings that didn't lead to bliss, but to chaos, insomnia, emotional breakdowns, intense visions, even physical pain. These aren't rare. They are just rarely spoken. Gopi Krishna, one of the few to document his full experience, wrote that he nearly went mad until he learned to surrender to the process instead of resist it. It's not something you control. Kundalini doesn't care about your spiritual plans. It rises when it's ready or when the inner conditions force it to. Practices like breath work, meditation, even trauma release can unintentionally trigger it. And when it does, the body becomes the battlefield of transformation. But here's the forgotten part. That upheaval is not punishment. It's purification. There are ancient methods to navigate this safely. One is Nadi Shodhana, a yogic breathing practice that balances the nervous system and prepares the inner channels. Another is grounding through the body, walking barefoot, eating dense food, slowing down thoughts. But no technique guarantees control. The truth is, Kundalini does not ask for control. It asks for surrender, for trust, for the courage to let go of the version of you that's pretending to be in charge. And that's the real reason it terrifies people. Because it doesn't awaken the divine you want. It awakens the one that's buried under fear, ego, and memory. The one you forgot. The one you were taught to suppress. And when it rises, it doesn't stop at healing. It rewrites your entire sense of reality. And at the peak of that current, when it surges through the crown, you don't meet a god. You don't meet a guide. You meet yourself, but not the self you recognize. The one that's been waiting, lifetimes deep, for you to wake up. What if the world around you is not really around you? What if every person you meet, every conflict you live, every pattern that repeats over and over is actually a message, not from fate, not from karma, but from the part of yourself you've tried hardest to ignore? Could it be that what we call reality is nothing more than a mirror, one that reflects not who we think we are, but who we refuse to see? Carl Jung didn't describe the unconscious as a dark prison. He described it as a mirror, a place where your unacknowledged desires, fears, and wounds hide in silence, waiting to be seen. And when they're not seen, they appear outside of you, in your partner, in your boss, in strangers on the street. He wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But most people never follow that thread inward. In spiritual psychology, this is called projection, but it goes deeper than theory. In a real case shared by Brazilian therapist Leticia de Oliveira on her YouTube channel, she describes how years of emotionally abusive relationships were not just coincidence. In a family constellation session, she discovered she was unconsciously replicating the suffering of her grandmother, someone she never even met. It wasn't logic. It was loyalty, hidden, generational, and invisible. And that's how the mirror works. It doesn't just reflect the present, it echoes the past. Patterns you don't remember, but still obey. Wounds you never received, but still carry. The outside world becomes a stage for the unconscious to play out what the conscious mind refuses to face. Until one day, something breaks. A repetition becomes too painful. A relationship ends, or a crisis begins. And suddenly, the mirror cracks and you're forced to look inside. There are tools to do this consciously. One is the ancient Hawaiian practice of Ho'oponopono, which isn't about changing the other, but taking radical responsibility for your inner world. Another is shadow journaling, writing what you don't want to admit until the paper becomes more honest than your voice. These aren't spiritual shortcuts. They're confrontations. And they only work if you're willing to stop blaming the reflection. Because what if every difficult person in your life wasn't an enemy, but a messenger? What if your frustration, your jealousy, your anger were just pointers, not toward punishment, but toward reunion? A calling back of the parts you exiled, the pieces you left behind to survive. And when you finally stop running and stand in front of that mirror, not to correct, but to witness, something begins to change in the reflection. Not out there, but in you. But it's what that reflection starts to reveal next that most aren't ready to see. In the ancient temples of Egypt, there were no sermons, no chants for the crowd, only silence. Long corridors carved in stone, lit by oil lamps and guarded by silence. If you entered, you did so alone. And if you emerged, you were no longer the same. Because these were not places of worship. They were thresholds, initiation chambers, designed not to teach you the truth, but to strip you of everything that kept you from seeing it. Historians now believe that many of these rites simulated death, not symbolically, literally. In some rituals, the initiate was placed inside a stone sarcophagus, sealed in darkness, breathing slowly, suspended between worlds. Hours passed, sometimes days. Why? Because only when the ego collapses, when all your titles, roles, and beliefs dissolve, can something deeper come forward. In those moments of surrender, the soul wasn't taught. It remembered. The mysteries of Eleusis in ancient Greece followed the same path. Participants went through symbolic death and rebirth, but the exact details were never written down. Plato himself called them the most blessed experience a human could have. Those who went through it never saw life the same again. And not because they learned more, but because they became less attached, less controlled, less afraid. But that level of revelation came with a price, the death of the false self. Modern thinkers like Jordan Peterson echo this principle in psychological terms. He says the transformation of the self requires a confrontation with chaos. That before you can be renewed, you have to be shattered. Not physically, but internally. And that's exactly what these ancient schools understood. The spiritual path isn't about feeling better. It's about dissolving the identity you've mistaken for truth. One former US soldier, in a TEDx talk, described a moment during combat where he genuinely believed he would die. But what followed wasn't terror. It was clarity. He said, "In the moment I accepted death, I met something in me I had never known. It felt like peace, but more than peace. It felt like freedom." That moment marked the end of his military life. He left everything and became a meditation teacher. Not because of belief, because of awakening. And that's what the ancient initiations guarded so fiercely. The truth wasn't hidden because it was secret. It was hidden because most weren't ready to lose themselves to find it. You couldn't be told the divine was within you. You had to lose everything you thought you were, so it could rise. Because when the ego finally breaks, when you stand naked before the unknown, something speaks not in words, but in presence. And what it reveals is not knowledge, but power. But it's what waits in the silence after that moment. That has never been written in any scroll. Every morning, you wake up surrounded by signs, patterns, numbers, synchronicities. You brush past them, scroll past them, label them as coincidences. But what if these are not random? What if the universe has a language, subtle, precise, ancient, and your body, your DNA, Your very breath was designed to speak it. In the God Code, author and researcher Greg Braden reveals something extraordinary. The Hebrew alphabet, when translated into molecular language, spells out the name of God in the very structure of human DNA. It's not a metaphor. It's a message etched into biology, as if creation wanted us to know that we are not separate from the divine, but encoded by it. And yet, this idea remains dismissed in mainstream science, buried under skepticism. Why? Because it collapses the divide. It says that you are not a mistake, that there is a mathematical precision in your existence. Ancient systems like the I Ching, the Kabbalistic Tree of Life, and the Tarot weren't games or guesses. They were maps of meaning, designed to decode the structure of consciousness itself. Not out there, but in here. In your thoughts, your emotions, your biology. A study published in 1996 by the Russian Academy of Sciences discovered that human DNA responds to language and frequencies. Not figuratively, literally. Words, sounds, even intention can reprogram genetic material. This challenges everything we've been taught about evolution. It suggests that consciousness isn't just shaped by biology, it shapes it. Your inner dialogue, your emotional tone, may be doing far more than creating moods. It may be speaking to your very cells. Brazilian therapist Andre Lima, through his use of EFT, emotional freedom techniques, found that when people used specific words while tapping points on their body, old traumas dissolved. Anxiety faded. Patterns broke. He wasn't healing people. He was helping them remember a forgotten alphabet, the emotional alphabet of the body. The kind of communication that bypasses logic and speaks directly to the energy system we stopped listening to. So if your body is listening, what are you telling it? If your cells are waiting for meaning, what message are you sending? Every thought, every breath, every emotion is like a brushstroke on an invisible canvas. The question is not whether the universe speaks. The question is whether you've silenced the part of you that knows how to hear. And once that hearing returns, not through effort, but stillness, the signs begin to rearrange. Numbers repeat. Dreams deepen. Time bends. Not because the world has changed, but because you have. But what that new language reveals is a truth the rational mind was never meant to control. We live in a world obsessed with control. Control your thoughts. Control your schedule. Control your future. The more we tighten our grip, the safer we think we are. But what if the very act of trying to control everything is the reason you feel so disconnected? What if the divine isn't something you achieve, but something that flows only when you stop trying to command it? Lao Tzu wrote, "A man is born gentle and weak. At death, he is hard and stiff. The hard and stiff will be broken. The soft and supple will prevail." In the Tao, power comes not from force, but surrender. It's a wisdom that makes the modern mind uncomfortable because we've been taught that freedom is won through dominance. Yet, spiritual awakening often begins with collapse, with falling apart, with letting go of the image you fought so hard to maintain. A study involving active meditation groups in the Netherlands revealed a surprising pattern. Participants who tried to meditate perfectly reported lower states of well-being and less connection, while those who allowed themselves to feel chaotic, distracted, even bored, often experienced moments of profound clarity. It's the paradox. When you stop forcing alignment, alignment starts to happen on its own. This theme echoes across countless traditions. In Zen, there's a concept called wu-wei, non-doing. Not passivity, but effortless action. Allowing life to move through you without resistance. It's the same principle behind the method of letting go, taught by Dr. David Hawkins. Instead of trying to fix emotions, you sit with them, feel them, watch them, until they dissolve, not because you did something to them, but because you stopped resisting. A woman interviewed by Zenflix, a Brazilian spiritual channel, shared how her life unraveled after years of chasing success. Burnout, divorce, isolation. But instead of rebuilding the old way, she did something radical. She stopped. No goals, no spiritual checklist, just being. And in that silence, she said, came an inner voice, not mystical, not grand, just true. For the first time, She wasn't pushing. She was listening. And that's where the deeper truth begins to show itself. Awakening doesn't come from mastering the divine like a skill. It comes from yielding to what was already there, underneath your expectations, your goals, your need to do it right. The more you try to become enlightened, the further you drift from the part of you that already is. So, what happens when you stop seeking? When you surrender not out of defeat, but out of trust, what force rushes in when your walls finally drop? The answer isn't in a method. It's in the moment you stop trying to escape this one. But what arrives in that stillness isn't something you can prepare for. From the moment you're born, you're taught to chase. Chase tomorrow, chase success, chase meaning. You learn to live 2 steps ahead, while the present moment becomes something you pass through, never something you enter. But what if this moment right now is not just time ticking by, but the only place where the divine actually exists? In The Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle describes a profound realization. The past is memory, the future is imagination, and only the now is real. But this isn't philosophy. Neuroscience backs it. When the brain is fully present, truly here, activity in the default mode network decreases. That's the part of the brain responsible for rumination, for identity, for endless inner chatter. What takes its place? Quiet, clarity, connection, not with the world out there, but with something deeper inside. Mystical traditions have always known this. Sufi poets spoke of the now as the only veil between man and God. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Zen monk, said, "The miracle is not to walk on water. The miracle is to walk on earth in the present moment." But this miracle is rare because being present feels too simple, too still. The mind doesn't like stillness. It likes movement, control, distraction. But presence is not an absence of thought. It's the return to what watches thought. The HeartMath Institute found that when people shift into coherent states of heart and brain, usually through mindful breathing and focused awareness, they begin to sense a larger intelligence, something they describe as intuition or even divine presence. These are not mystics. These are engineers, scientists, teachers. And yet, when they enter the present with full attention, something sacred stirs. A young man from Argentina shared in a podcast that after a car crash left him in a coma for nearly a month, he awoke without memories, but with a lingering sensation. He said it wasn't light or visions. It was stillness, pure presence. And for weeks after, he wept without knowing why. Not from fear, from recognition. He said, "I didn't remember who I was, but I knew I was more than I'd ever been." And this is what makes the present moment so powerful and so terrifying, because it leaves no room for stories, no past to regret, no future to control, just the truth of now with nothing to hide behind. In that space, you don't find comfort. You find reality, and reality doesn't ask for belief. It asks for attention. But what begins to unfold when your entire being rests in that sacred now? No longer resisting, no longer pretending, is not a mental state, but a gateway. And what waits behind that gateway is something time was never meant to contain. Since childhood, you've been building a mask, a name, a past, a set of likes and dislikes. You wear it like skin. You defend it in conversations. You even cry through it, thinking the tears are yours. But what if none of that is truly you? What if the person you call I is just a story so carefully constructed, so often repeated, that you forgot it was never real? Alan Watts once said, "You're under the impression that you're a thing inside a bag of skin." It sounds absurd until you realize that almost everything you believe about yourself was shaped by external expectations. Your behavior, your values, even your emotions, filtered through culture, trauma, and approval. But who were you before they gave you a name? Before they said good girl or be a man? Where did that self go? Modern neuroscience has started to dismantle the myth of a fixed I. In studies using fMRI scans, researchers found that the self is not one part of the brain, but a network of activity that shifts depending on mood, context, and memory. In simple terms, your sense of identity is a moving target. Yet we cling to it. We defend it. because the alternative, that we are not who we think we are, is too terrifying for the mind to hold. The mystic traditions knew this long ago. In Advaita Vedanta, the concept of neti neti means not this, not that. It's a method of peeling away illusions. I am not this body. I am not this thought. I am not this fear, until only silence remains. Not emptiness, but awareness. The real you, the one that watches, the one that cannot be harmed, labeled, or lost. And when people touch that state, even for a moment, something breaks open. A businessman in the UK reported during a silent retreat that, after 4 days without speaking, without his phone, and without his usual identity props, he walked past a mirror and didn't recognize himself. Not with fear, but with liberation. He said, "For the first time in my life, I wasn't performing. I wasn't anyone. And it felt like peace." This isn't annihilation. It's rebirth. Because once the illusion of identity begins to crumble, you're not left with nothing. You're left with everything. A self no longer based on memory or comparison. A being that doesn't need to explain itself to exist. But the mind will resist. It will cling to the known, even if the known is pain. Because ego isn't evil, it's just afraid to disappear. So what remains when the story ends? When the mask falls and the names fade? What stares back when you look in the mirror and nothing familiar is left? It won't be what you imagined. It won't be what you feared. But when that silent presence looks back at you, you'll know you've never really been alone. There's a contract written in silence. You didn't read it. You didn't sign it with a pen. You inherited it. From school, from family, from the quiet rules of society. It's not written in books. It's written in the way you were taught to behave. Be nice. Don't question. Fit in. And every time you obeyed, you signed a little deeper into an agreement that slowly erased your truth. This pact tells you who you're allowed to be. It rewards conformity and punishes intuition. It says, don't laugh too loud, don't cry in public, don't dream too big. And if you dare to break it, you're labeled dramatic, unrealistic, rebellious, unstable. But here's the truth most never face. The version of you the world accepts isn't real. It's a mask built for survival. But masks don't breathe, and they don't awaken. The philosopher Simone Weil wrote, "To be rooted is perhaps the most important and least recognized need of the human soul." But how can you be rooted when everything you are is shaped to please others? When your beliefs aren't yours? When even your fears were inherited? The pack thrives on silence. It keeps you asleep by convincing you that awakening is dangerous. But the danger isn't waking up. It's staying asleep in a life that was never yours. Take the infamous Milgram experiment. In the 1960s, psychologist Stanley Milgram found that ordinary people would obey authority to shocking extremes, even administering what they believed were fatal electric shocks, just because someone told them to. These weren't evil people. They were just obedient, conditioned, programmed to prioritize rules over conscience. And that same obedience is what keeps so many bound to lives that don't feel like living. A nurse, interviewed by The Guardian, shared that she didn't realize how much she was suffocating until her son was born. She had done everything right: stable job, polite life, quiet dreams. But holding him, she said she felt like a stranger in her own body. And that was the moment the pact began to tear. She quit. She traveled. She cried for a week straight. And for the first time, she said she heard her own voice. So ask yourself, who benefits from you staying small? Who taught you to fear your own depth, to silence your needs, edit your intuition, apologize for being too much? The world doesn't change when we follow rules. It changes when we remember who we were before the rules, before the pact, before the mask. And when that remembering begins, it won't be gentle, it won't be logical, but it will be yours, unapologetic, unfiltered, undeniable. But what happens when you finally break that pact? And nothing bad happens except the truth waking up inside you. It doesn't begin with light. It doesn't start with peace. The awakening of your deeper self often begins with confusion, restlessness, a quiet kind of pain that won't go away. You start asking strange questions. You start feeling things you can't explain. And instead of clarity, you feel lost. That's not a failure. That's the sign. That's the moment your divine self begins to stir beneath the surface. This stage has a name in spiritual traditions, the dark night of the soul. It's not poetic. It's surgical. It cuts through everything false. Teresa of Avila wrote that during hers, she felt abandoned by God, only to realize later that it was her ego that had been abandoned, not her soul. That inner silence, that sense of emptiness, it's not the absence of meaning. It's the stripping away of illusions that blocked it. Modern psychology often mislabels this as depression or existential crisis. But psychiatrists like Stanislav Grof argue that many of these cases are actually symptoms of a spiritual emergence, a shift in consciousness that doesn't fit into clinical definitions. On Reddit, in countless threads, people describe these experiences with trembling honesty, weeks or months of inner chaos, followed by dreams they couldn't explain, synchronicities too strange to ignore, and an overwhelming sense that something was guiding them. But here's what most don't understand. Awakening doesn't come with certainty. It comes with dismantling. The part of you that's waking up has never been conditioned. It doesn't speak in logic. It speaks in symbols, in silence, in energy. And most people, when it begins, shut it down. They numb it with routines. They medicate the discomfort. They try to get back to normal. But what if normal was the very thing you were meant to outgrow? To support this process, some use a synchronicity journal. Just a simple notebook. Not for logic, but for meaning. Repeating numbers, strange dreams, fleeting thoughts that feel too heavy to be random. This act alone, repeated daily, shifts the brain into a state of open attention where patterns emerge and the unconscious begins to speak. It's not a method, it's a remembering. And when that remembering gains momentum, your life begins to rearrange itself. People fall away, desires shift. You begin to lose interest in proving things and start craving silence. That silence isn't empty. It's a threshold. You're not losing yourself. You're losing what was never really you. Because just beyond that emotional fog, just beneath the ache that doesn't have a name, something ancient is rising. Not outside, inside. But what it reveals next is something no one else can tell you. You've searched through books, rituals, mantras. You've followed teachers, chased signs, begged the universe for answers, and still something feels missing. The silence doesn't speak. The light doesn't come. So you search harder, meditate longer, try to align. But what if that very effort is the veil? What if the divine doesn't hide from you, but from your need to find it? In the teachings of Dzogchen, one of the most advanced schools of Tibetan spirituality, there's no emphasis on effort. No steps, no path. The practice is simple but terrifying. Do nothing. Not out of laziness, but out of radical presence. Sit in awareness without trying to improve anything. Let thoughts come. Let them go. Just witness. And in that space, stripped of all seeking, something begins to glow that was never gone, only unnoticed. Philosopher Viktor Frankl once wrote, "Don't aim at success. The more you aim at it, the more you are going to miss it." He discovered this in concentration camps, where everything was taken, and still, some found a sense of purpose. He said that meaning arises not when you pursue it, but when you surrender to what is. And in that surrender, something larger enters. Call it grace. Call it stillness. But don't call it earned. A French pilgrim interviewed on a Camino de Santiago documentary described walking for weeks, desperate for clarity. He climbed mountains, rehearsed prayers, pushed his body to exhaustion. But the turning point came on a day when he gave up. Not from defeat, but from surrender. He stopped, sat on a stone, and for the first time, didn't ask for anything. He said, "In that silence, I felt no message, no answer, just something watching me from within." Because the divine isn't impressed by effort. It's revealed when the effort ends, when the layers fall, when you're no longer trying to be spiritual, but simply being. You don't awaken by becoming more. You awaken by becoming less attached, less defined, less hungry for what you already carry. So what if your endless search wasn't a path, but a distraction? What if the silence you fear is not empty, but full of the very presence you've been chasing all along. It doesn't arrive when you demand it. It unfolds when you stop chasing ghosts and turn inward without expectation. And in that quiet, in that terrifyingly simple stillness, there's no flash of light, no booming voice, only you as you've always been. But what awakens in that moment cannot be chased, cannot be named, and cannot be unremembered.